Well, good day there. This is Joe Van Cleve. Today's video, I'm going to talk about using Harman Direct Positive Paper for indoor photography at nighttime using artificial lights. Well, as many of you know who have watched my videos or have used this paper, the Harman Direct Positive Paper has an emulsion that is sensitive to a spectrum of light very similar to other types of black and white photo paper, mainly in the blue and UV range and a little bit of the green. It's not sensitive to the panchromatic spectrum of light. And this presents some unique problems when you're trying to use it as a film to take images in your camera with, because if you're using either an in-camera meter or a handheld light meter, those light meters are sensitive to the full spectrum of panchromatic light that conventional full spectrum films are. And so the metering might give you a reading that is a little more optimistic of the exposure than what the paper would actually receive, because the paper is not going to be sensitive to those green and red end of the spectrum. As a consequence, what we've had to do with Harman Direct Positive Paper is we've had to rate the speed of the paper using our own testing procedures. And I rate it anywhere from about 4 to 8 typically. I've used this paper a lot in outdoor shooting over the last decade or so, or however long it's been out. I've enjoyed it. Again, it's mainly daylight that I'm used to shooting it in. So when it comes to using this paper in indoor lighting at night, using artificial lighting only, it presents some unique problems, because if you want to use incandescent or tungsten illumination, that type of illumination doesn't really put out nearly the blue light that daylight has, unless you use really intense lights like floodlights, and then your light meter is going to be fooled, because it's going to see that intense light and underexpose the image on the paper. I recently started using these full spectrum white LED light bulbs in my house, but they're balanced in their color temperature to 5,000 degree Kelvin, which is essentially daylight. So they're daylight bulbs. In fact, the two light sources that I'm using to illuminate this video, I have some other lights in the background, but the two main close-in lights are both these daylight balanced LED light bulbs. And so I was thinking, you know, this Harman paper I'm used to working with it under a daylight spectrum. Why don't I try to use these daylight LED light bulbs as a source of illumination? So let me show you one of these light bulbs. Now, I didn't intend to show you this itself, which is a sort of a do-it-yourself form of lighting, but it's one of these inexpensive hardware store light reflector thingies. And I'm using bulldog clips, there goes one, to hold a piece of this white landscaping fabric that kind of acts like a diffuser. But anyways, these bulbs are standard household looking light bulbs, but they're LED. This one is an EcoSmart brand, but anyway, you can find these commonly now at hardware stores. It's an LED lamp, and it is 5,000 degree Kelvin. It's a 9 watt, 840 lumens, 5,000 Kelvin. It draws 97 milliamps of current. So that's that, and that's what I'm using. I use two of these, one in this homemade light source, and this light source is more directional lighting. It's not a soft panel type light, and the other one is my more softer light. So maybe I'll make a video at some future date about making little homemade lights like this for video and photography. These hardware type light things are, you know, under 10 bucks in the US. And a piece of translucent porous white fabric like landscaping fabric, some bulldog clips, and for under $15 or less, I mean under $15, you have yourself a 5,000 degree Kelvin light source. And I have a little makeshift little support stand that I just clip this to, but it makes a really good light for photography and video. Anyways, I was going to need several things. First of all, of course, the lights. I set up these 2 lights in my office. The second thing was the camera. I was using the speed graphic, as you saw me set up here just a minute ago. And I'm using the Fujinon lens, which has a modern shutter, so the timing is fairly accurate. And then thirdly, I'm going to need to meter the light. And so I was using my new meter, my Sekonic, which I'm still getting used to, and I don't like as much yet as my old analog Gaussian meter. But so the Harman paper, I have rated it in bright daylight, summer daylight, at around an ISO of 8. And I wasn't sure if these 5,000 Kelvin light bulbs would give me the same exposure as daylight. So I did two test pictures. One of them I rated at ISO 8 and the other one I rated at ISO 4. And my metering technique was basically in the incident metering mode with both lights striking me from both sides. And I believe that more directional homemade light that you just saw was actually, they were reversed. It was on this side and it was a little bit harsher, a little closer to me. But anyways, I was doing an incident metering like that. And I was using the lens on my speed graphic wide open and at f5.6, and the meter recommends 2-second exposure. Now, I did some adjustments to the lights, like near and far, and try, moving them back and forth a little bit to see how the exposure would change. And I noticed that the exposure time never changed. And with this meter, minute adjustments in exposure time are read with a fractional f-stop. So this says 5.65. And so you have to pay attention to that. That's how you make those fractional adjustments to your exposure. And let me show you how you do that on the lens. This is the Fujinon 135 f5.6 lens, and there's a little pointer up on top here for the aperture. The adjustment for it is underneath the lens, but as you can see, it's a continuous adjustment range on your f-stop. It's not in detent click positions like with conventional camera lenses. So if my light meter is reading 5.65, I just need to give it a little bit more higher F number than 5.6 to try to match what the meter's telling me. Now, I didn't appreciate this subtlety about this meter when I was doing these tests last night, and so I kept seeing 2 seconds at 5.6, and I didn't really understand why the reading wasn't changed. So my exposures weren't really quite as accurate as I had hoped. And I'm taking selfie photos with a large format camera. So how do you become in front of the camera as a subject while you want to be behind the camera to focus the camera? Let's talk about that. Obviously, these large format cameras like this World War II era speed graphic doesn't have autofocus, and it does have a manual focusing where you're focusing the bellows. You're pulling the bellows in and out. To focus close up, you pull the bellows forward, and to focus toward greater distances, you focus back. And when you're focused at infinity, the distance from the lens to the film plane is your rated size of lens. So in this particular lens, it's a 135 millimeter lens. So at infinity focus is 135 from the film plane to wherever the nodal point of the lens is. Anyway, so to focus these cameras, you have to look through the ground glass, and there's nothing behind there to focus at. But yeah, you have to look through the ground glass and then adjust the bellows. So if you're going to be the subject of the photograph in front of the lens, that presents kind of a challenge. So what I did and what I've learned to do is I use a focusing target. I have this little cardstock that is folded and taped up so it rests itself at roughly 90-degree angle, perpendicular to the yardstick. What I did to actually set that up, though, you go behind the camera and you put the yardstick in front like that, and you focus the camera ahead of time on that target. So I'm behind the camera looking through the viewfinder. I'm holding the yardstick up against the lens board, and I can adjust the focus of the camera, the position of the bellows, so that target is in focus. Then I sit down in front of the camera, I center myself on the lens, get my height set. I put the yardstick, the end of it, against the lens board. I set my focusing target next to my eyes. I have a 3-foot long shutter release cable in the other hand. I lower the focusing target, and then I can do my exposure with a shutter release cable. So that's kind of how you do that with doing a selfie with a large format camera. Now, as I said, I was going to do 2 images, one with the paper rated at ISO or exposure index of 8, and the other one with it rated at 4. With the paper rated at 8, the exposure that the meter was recommending was 2 seconds. And with ISO 4, of course, it was 4 seconds, twice that much. The problem with my shutter on my Fujinon lens, it only goes up to 1 second timed. So you have to use bulb. So this introduces another slight amount of variability, is how accurate can you count to 4? I use the simple counting method to time both exposures that were recommended by the meter. And then I take the film holder out. I do both shots, of course. I take the film holder out in the darkroom, and I load those 2 prints into my Jobo test print tank, the 2820 developing tank. And I develop both of these in one batch in the comfort and convenience of my kitchen. And I used Ilford multi-grade paper developer, diluted 1 plus 15. So it's 100 milliliters of water plus 7.5 milliliters of concentrate. Developed for 3 minutes, 30-second water rinse, 30-second stop bath, another 30-second water rinse, and then 2 minutes in fixer. It's a little bit more rinsing, and then I open it up and see what I got. And this is what I got. Yeah, so this was the ISO 8 2-second exposure done in my office. I like the picture. I thought the highlights on my face almost blown out. There is slight amount of detail. This bright homemade light source that I showed you earlier was very close to this side of my face, so it was almost too bright there. But I like the fact that my glasses were hung on my shirt. That kind of an interest. I didn't think about that ahead of time, that kind of detail. And then I have this desk lamp behind me that's a little distracting. As far as a portrait, it's not great, but as far as a test picture on how to do this at night, I was kind of pleased with the results. I thought the exposure time and aperture was rather consistent with what you might see in shaded daylight. Those kind of 1-2 second exposures is common that I've seen with shaded daylight. So that's the first picture that was ISO 8. Now the second picture was done at ISO 4, and of course I used 4 seconds, so twice the exposure, and obviously my face is overexposed. So yeah, I think what this test shows me is that using these kinds of lights, these 5,000 degree Kelvin LED light sources, you can pretty much expose this Harman paper very much like if you were in daylight outside. It gives you a similar kind of speed and sensitivity to the light. So if I do any more of this, I'm going to be rating this paper again at ISO 8, but it's going to take some careful metering and adjustment of your light sources. Like for instance, in this particular portrait, this other light panel off to the other side here was not that far away from my face, and yet it looks like there's almost no light there at all. The very, very dark shadows. And so there's a difference between the way this light source and the other light source, which is shooting through a thin white nylon fabric. There's a huge difference in the way that they render the light, and I think it has to do with how the ultraviolet and blue light is transmitted through the light source there. So it's still tricky, and it still involves some degree of experimentation. I think if I did this again, I would get a second one of these lights with a metal reflector, make a second one, and I think it would be a more consistent lighting setup. Well, I've been predominantly an outdoor shooter of Harman Direct Positive Paper and paper negatives. Haven't really done that much indoor work under artificial lights at nighttime. So this was kind of a first foray into this whole field, and I was kind of pleased with my results. They were ballpark pretty good. Obviously, I think I have a little more work to do with getting my getting the light source a little more consistent, using the same kind of diffusing method on both lights so the exposures are more consistent from one side of my face to the other. But the exposure times are very much in the ballpark of what I've experienced with daylight shade outdoors. So it was a rather encouraging test, and that means that if I want to do like still life photography in the future at nighttime, I can do that. One of the things that I really like about being able to do this indoor artificial lighting photography is, well, especially in the wintertime, when you have dark days and you might not want to go outside in the cold and you want to do some kind of still life or portraits or whatever indoors, this really gives you the option to easily do that with Harman Direct Positive Paper. In one step, being able to have a finished silver gelatin fiber-based print. So that's really encouraging. It's really exciting to be able to do that. So I would encourage you guys to put together some of the things that I've recommended in my previous videos with using Harman Direct Positive Paper. You don't necessarily have to shoot a large format camera. As you've seen in other videos, you can cut this paper down to size and put it in a medium format camera, or even 35mm cameras. You can load them one at a time in the camera. But it's a very fun process, and I would encourage you to get a couple of these 5,000 degree Kelvin daylight LED light sources, make up some like I did inexpensively, and go experiment with shooting this kind of indoor lighting setup. Well, until next time, this is Joe Van Cleve, and you have yourselves a great day.